Good afternoon and welcome to Conversations on Showing Up for Kids. The Southern Regional Center for Children and Youth with Special Healthcare Needs out of the Weisman Center tries to do this on a regular basis where we get people together and we talk about information and topics that are of concern or of interest to the families in the Southern Regional Center. We cover 14 counties in southern and southwest Wisconsin. We serve as a place for information, referral, support. We talk about advocacy, we do training. We try to help parents and families to navigate the system of care. Because as we all know, when our kids with special healthcare needs were born, like my son, we weren't immediately introduced to the system of care. Nobody covered it in birthing classes. Nobody talked to us about waiver programs and special needs trusts and all these things that we've had to learn on our own as families. The good news is Wisconsin has a pretty nice support system to help families out there. And so today we're going to be talking about that support system. And before we get into that, I do want to remind you that I am not a doctor. I am not a lawyer. Please do not take anything said on this program as medical advice or legal advice. We are just having a conversation. The other thing that I like to remind each of us is that it is being recorded. And everybody knows it's being recorded, which means that it will probably be on the internet somewhere forever and ever and ever. So please, no personal identifiable health information or personal information. Do your best to avoid that because it will be there forever. So that's enough of the intro. That's enough for me. Today, I am really excited to have Laura Knott and Lori Garso, which probably I forgot to, So this is how this starts. It starts with me forgetting to ask how to pronounce people's last name. We probably have Lori Knott or Laura Knott and Lori Garso. But for the time being, they're Laura Knott and Lori Garso. They will correct me later because they're wonderful people. We also have Kat on the phone, in the meeting room. And we are going to talk today about the Wisconsin's Children's Long-Term Support Program and Wisconsin's Katie Beckett program. We're going to hopefully get through why do we have these programs in Wisconsin and who's eligible for them? What do they have to do with families with children with special health care needs? So let's start with, as people will know it, because this is how families and everybody talks about it, CLTS. And so you hear people talk about CLTS. I have a CLTS waiver with the CLTS program. So who would like to take a stab at explaining shortly, of course, what is CLTS? Why do parents need to know about it?
Okay, I think that's me, Tim. My name is Lori Garso.
Lori.
My name is Lori Garso, and you pronounced it right the first time. I have been, my name's been pronounced many other ways, but Garso is the correct way. So I am a technical assistance lead in the South region and work for the Bureau of Children's Services and help support families and counties in that region through the Children's Long-Term Support Program, which is CLTS, and the Children's Community Options Program. So Children's Long-Term Support, or CLTS, is a home and community-based services waiver from the CMS, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, and it funds community supports and services for children who have substantial limitations in their daily activities, and they need support to remain in their home or community. Eligible children would include those with developmental disabilities or intellectual disabilities, severe emotional disturbances, and physical disabilities. And funding, once you're eligible, can be used to support a wide range of different services based on an assessment of those needs that is done with the child and family.
So when we hear the word substantial, can you give some examples about what substantial limitations are, or how you determine what a substantial limitation is?
Yes, I think Laura might be talking a little bit more about it, but there is a Children's Long-Term Support Functional Screen that's completed that it is a solid evidence-based tool and that determines based on that screen if a child has a significant substantial limitations. So if you're interested, you reach out to your county and ask for a functional screen to be completed. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too, unless Laura, do we want to talk about that right now? How to make that, how to find your way into the system?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly can. I think there's a couple different things to point out. One is that the functional screen that Lori is talking about is a screen that's used for multiple programs. So it's not just used for CLTS, but it's also used for Katie Beckett and for a couple of other programs. So one screen will determine eligibility for all of those programs at once, which is a really great way to find out kind of the myriad of programs that your child might be eligible for. It looks at a child's daily life. You'll kind of work with a field staff member or a county personnel who will ask questions about what your child's daily life is like. What is it like getting up in the morning and getting ready for school? And what type of support do you give your child during that process? Are you giving cueing to help them brush their teeth and make sure that they're able to do that? Do they need extra supports in the bathroom to move from the toilet to the sink to the bathtub? Do they need support in getting dressed? Do they have emotional or behavioral needs that make those things hard? So it's not just a physical care need or a medical care need. It could be a social, emotional, or behavioral need that impacts their functioning from day. So the tool looks at what would be typical development and what are the additional needs that child has based on their age. So a 9-year-old, we wouldn't maybe expect needs help washing their hair typically, but some children do. And so that's a need that they have that would be marked on a screen. And it's the conglomeration or the addition of all of those things within the screen that tells the results. So it's a little complex, but it's something that the parent doesn't really have to worry about because the field staff person will walk through the day of the life of their child. What is it like for your family to get through a day? And the screen will help determine what programs the child is eligible for.
Now, as a family member, I know my kiddo back when he was younger. He's a young adult now. Well, actually, even as an adult, he has good days and he has bad days. He has weeks where I don't have, I wouldn't have to cue him to do anything. It's like it's locked in, and I'm sitting there going, yes, and then the week will change, and it's all gone. Like I don't know what happened to it. So how does a functional screen take into account these, the fact that each of us has good days and each of us has bad days? Does it look over time, or is it a snapshot of that day? How does that work?
It definitely looks over time. And one of the ways that I talk about the screen is to talk about what does a parent do, or what does a school teacher do, or another person, grandma who's babysitting, what do they do to help a child get through a particular activity? And at what point is that skill internalized? Meaning, at what point do you no longer have to help, and not just on Thursday because Thursday was a particularly good day, but overall across the child's month, weeks, have they actually internalized that skill and they're able to do that on their own because they know it, they can do it. It's not based on a good day or a bad day. It's a skill that they have that they own now. So the screen does take that into consideration.
So we have the functional screen, which determines, I take you're probably not, I'm tempted to say it determines the level of disability, but that's just not true, because there's not like a scale of disability. Oh, your child's a 3, therefore. That's not the way it works. But it's looking at, is there substantial delay or substantial difference between their ability versus the ability of someone their own age?
Correct.
And then the other part, Lori, the explanation was that we have this home and community based waiver part. I think we have a lot of people these days that thankfully are very used to our family members with disabilities living with us and living in our houses, but that's not the way that it always used to be. And
Right.
so can you talk a little bit about what do you mean by it's a waiver program and that they're looking at out of home care?
Mhm.
Because it's just not language that parents use.
Yes. So the waiver is a waiver of Medicaid that allows states to provide additional supports and services to children so that they don't remain in an institution. The functional screen that Laura was providing better layman's terms for than I can, really looks at identifying and making sure that that child meets an institutional level of care, and so that they do qualify for the children's long-term support and other programs that are in that screening tool. Um, and they want to be the waiver then provides the additional supports to help maintain that child in the home and in the community, where kids belong. They don't belong in institutions, which is, when I was a child, that's what was the norm.
Yeah.
So that's very different now.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that too, that I think that was the norm in the 70s and 80s and even into the 90s when this language was coming about. And I think parents hear that term now and they're like, well, it's 2020, my child doesn't belong in an institution. Of course
Right.
not. Why? I wouldn't even consider that. And it's a scary word, but it doesn't mean that there's a belief that your child belongs in an institution. Quite the contrary. It's something that I really try. I think the whole program, we try to help parents understand that's kind of a jargony sort of word to try to ignore. It's something that we have to use in the way we explain things to the federal government and in some of the things that we have to do. But really, we're looking at the needs that your child has, and to kind of ignore that language and understand that this program is designed to help your child in the home and help your child succeed at school and succeed in extracurriculars and make sure to get out there in the community and really thrive.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That term, institutional level of care, is no family wants to sit there and use that term for their child, no matter how challenging that child may be, to sit there and say, oh, right, that's very scary. So I really like the way that you put it, that you're looking at the needs and that level of ability.
The goals of our program are really to help that child fully integrate into their community, and to look at them and support them through that age in their lifespan, and help them look at transitions and look at goals and help them be members of the community.
So you just mentioned that it goes through. It's not a one and done. Is that children grow and they change and they learn skills, and sometimes they forget skills, and sometimes their bodies work with them to develop more skills, and sometimes their bodies work against them. They start to lose. How do you keep track of where that child is at and what sort of services they may be eligible for?
Mhm. So when a child is receiving children's long-term support, they are working with a support and service coordinator who has regular contacts with the family, who works with you to develop a service plan to help maintain and your child in the community. And we use that through a philosophy called deciding together, where you the support and service coordinator will sit down with the family and help identify what are their needs, what are their concerns, you know, what are the issues that they have, and then look to how can we what kind of goals do you have in life? What even in this next year? And so from that, you develop a service plan that supports the outcomes that you develop together. And you can at any time you can always adjust that service plan. Things aren't going the way you need it to go. Let's revisit that service plan. Are there things that we're missing? Are there, other maybe community supports even that we should be exploring to help better support my child and our family as we, as we move, as we live in the community.
Well, Lori, I find it really hard to believe that we don't get it right the first time, every time. That's really groundbreaking, that we try something and we have to see how it works because we're dealing with humans here.
Right.
We're a big bundle of unknown. We are inconsistent. We have good days, we have bad days, we develop, we undevelop. So I love the fact that you try it and it's not, what you're not saying is, well, wasted that money, come back in another year. You talk to the service coordinator and you say, well, we missed the mark there. Let's, we didn't get to that goal or outcome. What else can we do to get to that outcome? And
there are, twice a year, there are intentional conversations about that, but any time along that trajectory in a, each year or each month, any day you can, try to revisit that service plan and revisit what it is we're, where we're headed. So. Yeah, twice a year, usually at the 6 month and an annual, what they call the annual review time, where they also will complete the annual functional screen to show that your child still qualifies. They're looking at, is that plan effective, or should we be making some adjustments to it?
So I'd like to go off in a little philosophical jaunt here for a moment. Please bear with me and join with me, because I deal with a lot of families that they then are in relationship and they know other families whose children receive support from the children's long-term program. So family A receives CLTS benefits and their child has autism and some functional difficulties. Family B has a child with autism, but they're not getting any support. They're not part of they're not receiving support through the children's long-term support program. They talk to family A, who says you should be with CLTS. Family B, because they think their child is similar to child A or child A, they assume they're going to get it. But this philosophy that's striking my head right now is, as nice as it is to have the support, this child is ineligible because they don't have that level of need. Is because they have a level of functioning and a level of support already present in their life that we think they're going to be able to succeed to the standards of their peers. They're going to be able to keep up with their peer group. Is that sort of the philosophy, or am I missing the mark on that?
And I think Laura might be able to better speak to some of those differences. I also will say that there could be two children that have the same diagnosis that are both in the children's long-term support program, and their plans look very different because it's individualized to that child. And so sometimes what I hear and from families is, why is Johnny's plan different than Joey's? And it's really because you're individualizing that plan to meet the goals and the outcomes that you have. And every family is different, every situation is different, and so the plans, no two plans look alike,
nor should they.
Yeah.
And I can speak a little bit to maybe the access piece of that philosophical conversation you're talking about, because one of the things that we tell screeners a lot is that you're measuring the child and the child's needs. not the child in services. And what I mean by that is that if you have family A who came to the door without any services, maybe they had that new diagnosis and they work with their support and service coordinator and they get a plan in place and they're moving along. And then you have family B who maybe already has some support in place. That doesn't mean that child's not eligible just because they're succeeding with those supports. What you do is you look at that child and you say, well, those are extraordinary supports. They're not typical supports that a child would have. And so what would happen if those supports weren't there? And this is often a conversation with parents that can be challenging too, because parents naturally and intuitively do what they need to do to help their child succeed. And they don't necessarily verbalize that those are things they're doing. And so a really good screener is going to talk about, well, what extra things do you do during the day? You know, you're telling me that dinner time goes really well at home, but it doesn't go well at school. So tell me, what things do you do during dinner time that make that successful? And then when you're measuring that child, you're not measuring them based on the success that they have in that moment, even though that's incredible and wonderful and, you know, way to go parents. You're measuring what are the extraordinary things that that parent had to do and what would happen if they didn't do those things. What would happen if they had dinner at grandma's and things didn't go in the same way? What would happen if they were in other situations? You know, this child in your scenario, child B, who maybe has all these supports already in place, and that's wonderful. What would happen if they didn't have those supports? And then we use the functional screen in that way. And then if they're eligible, CLTS can continue those supports and maybe add to them. That can become part of their service plan.
Well, if a family's listening to this, and this may be the first time they've heard about the Children's Long-Term Support Program, which is not true, but it's possible. What would lead them to consider contacting the county to see if their child's eligible? It's a really poor question. Thank you very much. Poor question. But if they're listening and they're going, well, I just don't know if my child is eligible or not, if my child fits that, if we would get it, what should they do? Should they go to the internet and research it more? Because we know the internet is full of wonderful, wonderful factual informations, lots of stuff. How do they figure out what's their next step?
Each county has intake contact. So most of those are county personnel. There's also in some counties a field staff person, but we have a website that we can give to you. We could put it in the chat pod. I'm not sure if we can cut and paste that now. But that website,
or you can send it to me in email, and what I'll do is I'll put it in the description under the video on YouTube channel. So we have a list of resources there.
Yeah, and so you would find your county within that list, and it's going to tell you exactly who you need to call. And these individuals are knowledgeable about the screen, about the eligibility process, and about what each of the programs offer. And so for the CLTS program, there's a whole host of things that can be used or ways the funding can be used to support your child in the home, adaptive aids, different therapies, different ways to support the child in the home. And so what I would say is if you have even an inkling of, I need some extra help, it is worth it to call and talk to an intake worker who can help you understand the process better, understand what it would look like for your family, and then you can make decisions from there. But they're very knowledgeable, very helpful individuals to contact.
Do they do a pre-screen? Like, are they going to ask the families, well, could you explain a little bit more, and then I'll let you know whether you need to bother?
No, so we do not screen families out. And that's kind of what you're describing as kind of a screen out process. They'll help them understand, they'll gather some information if the family wants to talk about the child right then and there. They'll help them understand what the program can provide, but they have the right to a screen. So if a family would like to see if they're eligible, they absolutely have the right to have a screen completed and to find out what those eligibility results are.
We want to know the family's drive that bus every step along the way. They say, yes, I want to continue, or no, I don't. Even after, they find that maybe a functional screen has found that their child is eligible. Do you want to continue? Yes or no? So it's a decision that the family makes, and our, the staff that, work with families are to, help them understand all of the goods and the pros and the cons through the process. So, and that when you're entering into a Medicaid program, such as the home and community-based waiver program, there's extra steps along the way. And the waiver staff try to minimize that as much as they can. And the impact of that, but there are still things that have to happen, and sometimes families don't want to do that. For instance, you have to be eligible for a Medicaid program to be part of the CLTS waiver program, and some families decide they don't want to do that, and that's okay. But know that you're always in charge as a family of making those decisions.
So let's talk briefly about Medicaid, because, it's such an easy subject and everybody understands it clearly.
Mhm.
So when you say that CLTS is a Medicaid program, does that mean that they have to have Medicaid before they can be eligible for CLTS? Where's the horse, where's the cart? Not that that
Oh.
works anymore as an analogy,
Yep.
because very few people have horses, carts.
Mhm.
But I can't think of a better one.
Mm-hmm. So because it is a waiver Medicaid program, yes, you do need to receive a Medicaid source, but there are so many sources of Medicaid, including a Medicaid waiver, a waiver Medicaid option. Katie Beckett is a Medicaid program. So there's lots of different doors per se to obtain Medicaid, and that support and service coordinator and that county waiver agency is going to help you along the way. And same with if they're looking for Katie Beckett, you're going to have a Katie Beckett consultant who's going to help you navigating that process. So you're never alone. We hope that you feel supported by the folks that are helping you.
So if somebody would call a consultant, the consultant's not going to say, call us back when you get Medicaid.
No.
They're going to help figure out that eligibility with them.
Right.
Do you mind talking, not to put you on the spot, this was not in the pre-email that I set out.
Okay.
But as we also, I did want to talk about Katie Beckett a little bit today, but could somebody lay the foundation? What are the different ways that families get into the Medicaid program? What are a couple of those main doorways where you see families coming in?
Yep. So there are a lot of children who are already receiving Badger Care, Medicaid. Some families choose Katie Beckett Medicaid or want to apply for Katie Beckett Medicaid. That is one of the doors. You can be on adoption, a special needs adoption. Those children automatically receive Medicaid. If you're in a foster care, children in foster care are receiving Medicaid. And then there's the home and community-based Medicaid program. So there's lots of different doors to look at. And that support and service coordinator is trained to know all of those doors and to help the family navigate and make sure that they get through that process smoothly.
Again, I hope to come back. I have lots of questions just because I talk to lots of people, and that's the way my brain seems to work. But I do want to hone in a little bit on this doorway to Medicaid called Katie Beckett. I know a lot of people think, when they think Medicaid, they think people that are struggling financially, maybe don't have haven't had the opportunities or don't have the finance, that there's a certain level of financial eligibility to get into Medicaid. But Katie Beckett is slightly different. Can someone explain to me the eligibility then for Katie Beckett?
Absolutely. So Katie Beckett is different, where other forms of Medicaid are income-based, meaning parents' income. Katie Beckett is not. So Katie Beckett came out of federal regulations created in the 80s, and it's named after a little girl named Katie Beckett. She was a very young child who had some really significant medical needs. And Medicaid, which she did have, would pay for her care if she were in a hospital. But we had the technology and we had what we needed for her to be at home, and yet Medicaid wasn't going to pay for that. And so Katie Beckett Medicaid was created so that she could go home and be at home. And I think there's a lot of benefits to that. I mean, the obvious benefits of a child at home rather than in a hospital, the benefits to the family of being a family, being in the community, being together. Are astronomical. There's also a cost benefit of the cost difference between caring for a child on a Medicaid program in a hospital versus caring for a child in the home is significant. There's just a vast number of benefits to that. And so that was the impetus behind, or the process to beginning Katie Beckett Medicaid. But one of the other benefits of that is that it's based on the child's income, which, what does that mean, child income? It's not based on the parent's income. So a parent can make any amount of money and be eligible. A child has a max amount of income that they could have a month, and it's a pretty enormous amount. It's over $2,000 a month that they would be receiving in child support or death benefits, or some other sort of monthly income that they would be receiving that would make them ineligible. That almost never happens. So for the family, what ends up happening is it becomes a much more stable form of MA in addition. So where, for instance, Social Security disability medical assistance, so a child has disability and they have medical assistance attached to that does have a family or parent income limit. And so if a parent has seasonal work, or they get a part-time job, or they get a raise, and now all of a sudden my MA is in jeopardy and I have to make some very hard decisions for my family, Katie Beckett MA provides much more stability for that child and for that family, and ensuring that child's care needs can be met.
And is it the same functional screen to determine eligibility for Katie Beckett, or how is eligibility determined for Katie Beckett?
It's the same functional screen. There is a slight difference. So Katie Beckett does have an additional criteria that the child has to meet the disability determination based on the Social Security Act. And so there's an additional step where that child's file would be reviewed by our Disability Determination Bureau here with the state. And if they meet those criteria, then they would be functionally eligible. For all of the programs, there's also, Wisconsin residency requirements. There's some requirements about, having the immigration status, things like that. But those are all kind of non-functional eligibility criteria. The functional eligibility would be determined by the functional screen for all of the programs. And then in addition, having the disability determination for Katie Beckett.
One of the difference between Katie Beckett and Children's Long-Term Support Program is that Children's Long-Term Support does not need to have that disability determination. So a child can qualify by that functional screen. So they need to have both that functional screen eligibility and then some kind of Medicaid eligibility. So, and having those two services or having those two be a yes means that you could get those Children's Long-Term Support Program services. I think one of the cool things, because many years ago, I did some research on Katie Beckett, and it's a relatively new program. It started with President Reagan. The family appealed to their legislator in Iowa, and it rose to the president's level, and he enacted the Katie Beckett program named after Katie, who he had met when she was in the hospital in Iowa. So really cool story of how people can make a change. And so I like that. And think about that as, as I'm working with families and knowing that their efforts do make a difference.
That is a great story. I love it. And I love the fact that the way that both of you talk about this program.
Tim, I think you muted yourself.
Yes, I saw that, and I don't know what I did. I think I might have leaned on my space bar. Not for lack of interest, but because I want to get closer. But I love that story of Katie Beckett and family. I'm right with you. With families can make a change. Families can make a difference. Families need to be involved in the decision-making process. That there shouldn't be decisions made about families unless they're made with the families. It just doesn't make sense. You're just asking yourself to go back and redo it later time. So you might as well involve them at the beginning.
Yep.
What I also like is where you both talk about the importance of being at home, being in the community. We know no one's going to sit there and say that I've had a normal, whatever that is, a normal life with my child. I've had as great a life I could have with my child. But did he do everything at the same time as the other kids in his grade? No, he didn't. Did it sometimes feel like the train left the station and I had to get on at a later stop? Yeah. But I wanted him to be around other kids. I want him to be around people. I want him to figure out what it's like to live in this world and not apart from this world. And it seems to me that's what children's long-term support, and then the support of Katie Beckett, having people eligible by reason of disability, not just financial, make them eligible for the support of Medicaid, seems to be about helping people live in a society where they are, and not taking them out of it.
Right. It's helping them live their best life.
Yeah.
It really is. So I'm very grateful that Wisconsin is one of the states that does have the waiver program, and we have very strong support for families of children with disabilities. It's amazing. Lucky to be in the state.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree. Well, I know that people will only listen to us for so long. And I think we're pretty much at that point, but any final, and I'd love to reserve the right to invite y'all back with maybe some other colleagues to talk a little bit more about, I know we didn't get a chance to get into this whole question of, okay, so the long-term supports are there to help me with outcomes and goals to help my child reach them, but just to sit there and say, well, what goals do you have for your child? Well, I want them to not run into the street. That would be a goal. So I'd love to come back and have a discussion around what are goals and outcomes. And how do families find those? Because again, it's not a normal language. Around talk about them.
Right.
So
it's what issue, yeah, you're right. It's issues and concerns, and what do you see? What do you envision in your child's best life?
Yep, and usually I'm in a moment when somebody asks me that, it's probably I'm in the moment of crisis, and I can tell you what I think I need. And so translating that need into an outcome, I think is important. So we can talk about that later. I want to talk about that later because I really like you guys. So will you guys come back sometime and talk with us again?
Absolutely.
Bring along other people too if you want to. We'll just, eventually we'll be at a coffee shop somewhere. I'll get subsidized by Caribou Coffee or somebody. Not that they paid for that, so I am not in any way compensated by Caribou Coffee. But I like my house, but I can't wait to get back out that way. So thank you guys. Any final words? Any final things that you want families or other professionals to know?
Yeah, I think just my final word would be that, I'm the Unified Access and Intake Coordinator, so I push access hard. Families often are unsure. They're living their lives and doing the best they can, and the idea of adding another program, another evaluation, another appointment is hard and scary. But just really encourage you to reach out and ask questions to the intake people in your county. They have a wealth of information and resources. There are other resources through Tim's agency, but coming to that door and asking for help is really hard, and it's really scary. But we have people that have these conversations with families all the time, and I really encourage you to reach out and ask for that help.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Laura. Lori, anything final that you want to say?
No, I think Laura very much summarized it. So thank you.
Really nice. And just for people watching along, we recognize that Kat has joined us in this room, but we are not going to make Kat talk to us. So it's okay. Kat is a friend of ours, and she is here learning alongside of us. So we're very excited to have her here, but I just want to make sure people didn't think that I was ignoring. Well, why didn't he let Kat ask any questions? He was so mean. He never talked to Kat. No, I realize Kat's there, and Kat, I think, is okay with everything we've done so far.
Yes, it was wonderful. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. So besides going online, we'll post how people can find their CLTS, Children's Long-Term Support, waiver person, intake person, as well as how to find Katie Beckett. But you're absolutely right, is the information referral specialist at the Southern Regional Center would love to connect you with those specialists, would help connect you to those consultants, because then we get to have a bigger conversation. That it's not just the waiver. What else is going on in your life? How's school? How are you doing with your community? Because we know that our kids don't live in isolation. Our kids aren't just our medical diagnosis. Our kids aren't just in school. They live a whole life. And we want them to live a whole life. So please call us. We want to talk about that whole life with your kid. We're at 1-800-532-3321. That link, of course, will be there as well, because, well, they're the ones that love me. So thank you all so much for being here. Please do not leave the room. I'm going to end the recording, but then I want to make sure that we have our other goodbyes as well. So thank you very much. We're going to stop the recording now.
Thank you.